Okay, it's right at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, or it's at the top of the hour for wherever you're at in the world, right? So thanks to everybody for piping in for this very impromptu sort of discussion about training aid validation. I'm Robin Grubel. I am the CEO of the Canine Census Foundation, which is dedicated to coaching the human end of the leash. And I will let Michelle introduce herself and kind of launch into everything, but I wanted to give everybody a heads up that we are recording the meeting. The meeting will be available for viewing. Once we get done, I'll download it. And then actually upload it to YouTube, and it will go out for free permanently in our YouTube library. So anybody can have access to it at any time. And so we'll go for there. If as we go through and you have questions, please put them in the chat, and then we'll go through that way, because I want to allow Michelle to get all of her information out there. And then we will be able to answer and hopefully answer questions as we go along. I may, as we go through, and if I see that a question comes up that's actually really pertinent, and because Michelle and I, of course, have talked about what we're covering, I might interject and just make sure or ask a clarifying question that way. So with no further ado, Miss Michele Maughan, would you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, I'm Michelle and Robin. Thank you for hosting. And I really appreciate the opportunity to get some of this much needed information out there. So I am Michele Maughan. I am representing just myself today. So I have many affiliations, but I do not speak for or on behalf of any of those affiliations today. So I am a research scientist for a company called XSET. I am assigned to performing research in olfactory sciences, specifically for military working dogs for the US Army. And I am have a background in animal science, and have been doing a lot of applied work in that area for the Department of Defense and other federal agencies for quite a while now. So in that role, we have a lot of projects that are specifically related to canine training aid validation. And so that is what I will be speaking on today. So one of the terms that we use very often within the DoD or Department of Defense is another acronym is Independent Verification and Validation, IVV. So what that really means is it's a third-party independent evaluation to determine if the system or the training aid meets the needs of the end users. And so that part is the validation part. And we also then want to make sure that the training aid would then fulfill its intended purpose, so the stated requirements. So if someone says this training aid is a maintenance training aid, then that is something that we would verify. Or if it says this training aid is something that you could use for initial odor training and for maintenance training, then that's something we would also look at. And then that it also matches the manufacturer's specifications. So oftentimes a manufacturer will say this training aid is good for 6 months, 12 months, 6 years, however long they say it's good for, or under what storage conditions. And that's another thing that we would verify. It's extremely common to perform IV&V within the Department of Defense. This is stuff that is usually a requirement of many projects, that there is an IV&V step before any project or product gets launched. And often it's an iterative process throughout the product development cycle so that you can get a positive feedback loop and not end up with a product that doesn't meet the end user specifications or needs. And so it really does help make sure that throughout some of these projects that end up being several years long, that you do have a system of checks and balances throughout that time period. So what we call RDT&E is research, development, test, and evaluation. It does ensure that there's high quality outcomes for these large scale projects. So it's an important step of a lot of these projects, and it's one that it's a role that we in my day job that we've sort of taken to heart. And whether that's a canine project on a training aid or whether that is a handheld sensor, it doesn't really matter what the item project is. It has a very distinct set of steps that you would undergo to do that IV&V. So I wanted to get some definitions established early on when we talk about canine training aids. Allison Simon et al. In their paper last year did a really nice job of establishing some definitions for training aids. And in their paper, a review of the types of training aids used in canine detection training. This paper is open access, available on the interwebs. So you all can check it out. But this is one of the graphics, one of the first graphics from the paper where they talk about the different types of training aids. And so true material is the would be the training aid that is the actual true material. So if it's, that would be a bulk explosive, or if it's if you're talking about HRD discipline, that would be the actual body parts, or in narcotics, that would be actual drugs. So that when we go further in the slide deck, that's what I'm talking about when I say true material. And then there's another category called pseudo odors, and that is when there are volatile compounds that are released from or associated with the true material. So still odors that are associated with the true material, and then those are put onto sort of a mixing agent, and they try and replicate what the true material smells like. And then there are a whole four subcategories right now of non-pseudo alternatives. And those non-pseudo
make sure you're muted, please. Okay. Hopefully that took care of it. Sorry. Oh, hang on, except for Michelle.
Okay, I'm good now.
Okay, thank you.
All right,
sorry.
Sorry, no problem. There's four subcategories of non-pseudo alternatives. One is dilution. So one of the ways to render true material potentially non-detonable, so this often applies to the explosive training aids, is to dilute it. And so then you can take fractions or pieces of the true material and add it to a mixing agent. Oftentimes this is something, it's put onto silica, little glass beads, or onto diatomaceous earth, mixed on there, and that can be a non-detonable or non-pseudo alternative. You can also then encapsulate, so you could take true material and use an encapsulating agent to make a training aid. There's also some extraction-based training aids, not very common. And then there are becoming more and more common, but these add or absorption-based training aids. And so these are often consists of something like a get sent tube or a PDMS, polydimethylsiloxane based training aid where it's odor capture. So there's actually no true material present, but it's a gel or a polymer or some sort of substrate that is able to collect the odor of the training aid and become impregnated with the odor of that training aid, either by the odor sticking onto it or the odor becoming impregnated into the actual sort of matrix of that substrate. And those are becoming, like I said, more popular and only consist of the odor of that true material. Oh, so now I can't, oh, there we go. Okay, so we have a crossover study design that involves green dogs when we want to validate a canine training aid. And oftentimes we will include two groups of dogs, and group one will, for this case, consider the experimental group. Group two would be called the control group. And group one, being the experimental group, would be, and I know Robin, don't kill me with the imprint word there, but for the larger audience would have their initial odor training consist of the novel training aid. And so that is, when I say novel training aid, I say this is the training aid of interest. So if there's a new training aid that comes out on the market, it's anything other really than the true material that we're talking about. So if it's there's an explosive training aid out there, it's we're not talking about the actual explosive, we're talking about a new non-detonable explosive training aid that comes out. That's what we're talking about when we say novel training aid. So, and it could be anything. There could be a novel training aid for narcotics, for cadaver, for bed bugs, whatever it is. So those dogs would be imprinted, trained on that novel training aid. Group two, the control dogs, would be imprinted and trained on true material. So that's the traditional way of training the dogs if there weren't a novel training aid available. And so then when it comes to test and evaluation time, we would test the dogs in group one to see if they are able to detect true material, and test the dogs in group two and see if they how they respond to the novel training aid. And we can get a ton of information out of this type of study design. There's also a more simplistic study design where we have novel training aid validation. It's only looking at the validation of this novel training aid using, again, green dogs. We just have one group, the experimental group, imprinted, trained on the novel training aid, and we do a test and evaluation against the true material and the novel training aid. Obviously, the control in the experiment there is that the dogs need to be able to find their own the novel training aid, because that's what they've been trained to detect previously, and then we see if they are able to find true material. So there's a couple different study designs that we can employ depending on number of dogs available and sort of what kind of the outcomes we're looking for. So when I talk about outcomes, this is a big slide, so you're gonna have to sort of stay with me on it. And Robin, this is where you might want to chime in if like the chat starts blowing up, because this is the analysis of potential outcomes, and there are a lot. And so I'm going to go through the analysis of potential outcomes, assuming that we did the crossover study design of these two groups, the experimental group and the control group. So one of the, so we have 8 potential outcomes here. So, and some of them can be inclusive, they're not all mutually exclusive. So the first one is the experimental group detecting true material. And that is the only validation of a novel training aid for initial odor training. And I say there, and probably maintenance training, but we don't know that yet. But what that, out of all of these different outcomes, that is the only one that we would consider a validation of a novel training aid. And so if we go back here, that's right here, this group that was imprinted and trained on this novel training aid is able to, they get that training done, and we put out true material, and those dogs detect true material. That validates that training aid is effective for a capability of detecting the real thing. That is what we would consider a validation of a training aid. And that's the only outcome that would then validate that training aid. The rest of the potential outcomes are information less than that, and I'll go over that. So another outcome could be that the experimental group does not detect the true material. And in that case, we would say that novel training aid is not valid for initial odor training. So that means that simply that you cannot imprint and train dogs, green dogs, exclusively on that novel training aid and expect them to find the real thing, the true material. It's not going to work. We just demonstrated that in a well-designed experiment. So we have controls built throughout this study as well. So we want to make sure that the control group detects the true material, and that the control group and that the controlled group, and that the experimental group detects the novel training aid. So those are the two positive controls that we have. So that means that this group detects their training aid, and group 2, their control, detects true material. What that shows us is that it demonstrates that the canine training was efficacious. You would be surprised, or maybe not, that sometimes we show up and we perform an assessment where the trainers, I guess they haven't been training blind at all. We show up and put out, do a proficiency test, and the dogs are not able to find the training aids, and the trainers are stunned, and it's because they haven't been training to what they think they've been training to. So if there's some sort of contamination in their training, there's some sort of other issue going on in their training, but basically we're not able to move on to a test and evaluation because those dogs cannot even detect what they're supposed to be detecting. If those groups, like I said, aren't able to detect that, it demonstrates the inefficacy of that canine training, and basically that entire experiment would not be valid. So then we have the sort of reverse, where the control group can detect the novel training aid. And in that case, we say the novel training aid may be valid for maintenance training, but we would need further studies to confirm that. So what that means is that this group that detects true material, when we put the novel training aid in front of them and those dogs detect it and sit, it's a great sign, certainly good information, but that doesn't validate a training aid at all. What that means is that that's information that says that already trained dogs may be able to use that novel training aid as a maintenance aid. If the control group does not detect that novel training aid, that novel training aid is not valid for maintenance training. So if fully operational dogs right here completely walk this novel training aid, this novel training is not going to have any utility as a maintenance training aid. And then we have the experimental group. If they're not able to detect the novel training aid, like I said, that sort of can point to efficacy issues in the canine training, but also may point to issues inherent with the training aid. So because it's a novel training aid, maybe it has a shelf life of, I don't know, 10 minutes. And we thought it was going to be 10 months. And so we're thinking we're doing all the right things training wise, but really it's not an issue about canine training or the dogs or anything at all. It's an issue inherent in the training aid. And it's just not stable enough to be a usable training aid for any sort of real canine training. So bottom line is that even when we would get an experimental group that detects true material, that validation, that gold standard validation of green dogs, trained on a novel training aid and they detect true material, we still need further research to assess that training aid service life and shelf life. And then we also need further research to understand the consistency and robustness of the canine detection over time and see how those dogs can generalize to other variations of true material. So if you have dogs that, let's say they were trained on some sort of ammonium nitrate training aid, and for whatever reason you weren't able to use the true material and you had to use a novel training aid, or let's say it's odor absorption based, and so you have a substrate that has captured the odor of ammonium nitrate, and that's your novel training aid. The dogs have been trained on that, and then pure ammonium nitrate was put out as true material for the test, and the dogs bang that out. Dogs alert, great, this novel training aid has been validated. It's been validated that those dogs can train on that novel training aid and find pure AN. But what we would still want to understand and do is see how if the dogs can then find other variations of AN and what the threshold levels are of those dogs. And so can those dogs find AN mixtures based on that initial training on that AN novel training aid odor absorption? And what is that training aid's shelf life and service life and all that? So there's still more work to be done even after you do that initial validation of the initial efficacy of that training aid. So it sounds like a long process, and it absolutely is. This work is insanely expensive when we start talking about green dogs, and you have groups of 5 or 6 or 7 dogs, and we're talking in each group. So it's a lot of work. It's very expensive, and it takes a lot to, and this is for each training aid. So it takes a lot to get from the development of a training aid then to know if it's going to be valid. So on the next, so then I highlight these two in the 2 green boxes here, is that best case scenario is that in your experiment, if you have these 2 groups, is that the experimental group detects true material, and you have that novel training aid validated for initial odor imprinting. And in that same experiment, your control group detects the novel training aid. So what that looks like is this group right, has been trained on only this novel training aid and bangs out the true material. So they see that and they're just like, oh yeah, I absolutely know what that is. And this operational type group, this control group that has been trained on true material, smells this novel training aid and they're like, that smells exactly like true material. And both of those sets of dogs are detecting that with equal proficiency. That's the holy grail. And that then would show, demonstrate that that training aid is valid not just for initial odor training, but also potentially for maintenance training. It's a really, really good sign. But still, we would still need to do the further research that I point out in that bottom box about the robustness of detection over time and generalization. And then training aid assessments for the shelf life and service life. So what we see happening in the real world is not what we just talked about. What we see happening is, obviously they're not called control groups. We see there's a call for operational dogs. And so someone will take their N of 1 certified operational dog, which we would have called a control group, but that dog has theoretically been imprinted and trained and is certified on true material. And so that dog is, has been sufficiently trained. And if that dog is not able to detect true material, they've got other issues and hopefully they're not participating in any other things. They're just training. But these operational dogs are being used in training aid testing. And so what's going on is that then that dog is being tested to see if that dog will detect the novel training aid. And we have to remember that that's not a training aid validation. What that says is that the training aid may be valid for maintenance training, but we still need further studies. And that's really all that you can extrapolate from that, because there typically aren't experimental controls built into what we see happening. There aren't sufficient subject numbers. And most of these calls to participate in like testing with operational dogs are not properly designed canine trials. So people will say, well, what about change of behavior? So if it's not a detection, but my operational dog has a change of behavior on this novel training aid, well, what about that? It might not be a detection. So to that we say, in a properly designed experiment, emphasis on properly, change of behavior is absolutely meaningful and can be quantitatively and qualitatively assessed. We have a scoring system for change of behavior that is judged by canine SMEs. It's also, video recorded. And so that is, even external SMEs would typically agree on that scoring system. Sniff time can be assessed as well. So how long dogs sniff on target or non-targets. And that correlates with canine interest and change of behavior. But there's so many other reasons that dogs demonstrate change of behavior. And so when a canine study is not properly designed and we see people saying, okay, well, my dog showed change of behavior, so obviously there's something there. We say, oh, maybe, but think about all of the other reasons why a dog could demonstrate change of behavior. And I've listed just, I think, some of the ones that I could just think of off the top of my head, but we have novel odor in a familiar environment. So what does that look like? So I have, some sayings here of what is going on in your dog's little brain here. It's like, ooh, what's this new thing in my training area? Right? Because we tend to train in a lot of the same areas over and over again. So your dog knows every little pea spot, every little scent that's in that whole area. So if there's a new odor in there, novel odor, familiar environment, they're immediately like, boom, what is that? And so they'll show a big change of behavior. It's not meaningful from a detection standpoint. Sometimes we have familiar odor in a novel environment. You take your dog to a new training area, completely new, and dog's never been there before, but you bring your old, gross contaminated cotton scent bag with your human scent on it, and you throw that out there. Your dog's like, smells like home. Thank you so much for bringing my training aid from home. This is wonderful. So again, another major gimme for the dog. Another sort of easy one for the dog to say, yeah, that's, easy change of behavior right there. Not necessarily odor-based detection or target odor-based detection. Human scent contamination. We see human scent contamination on so many training aids or things associated with training aids. So that's another major cue for dogs. And so that's something where your dog is saying, Mom, Dad, is that you? Oh, I knew you were here. Thank you so much for giving me, something to sniff on. And that's easily another one of those change of behaviors. Canine scent cues, dogs that are training together or dogs that even don't train together, but there's something that happened in that area. It's like, oh, hey, Bingo, what happened here? Smells like you were pretty excited right around here. Dogs, remember, have an organ in their body, the vomeronasal organ, that we don't even have. So it's an organ in their nose that smells or picks up on pheromones. And so they're able to smell sort of like reward and dopamine and all of these other productive pheromones and hormones that other dogs are secreting that we would never have any idea even exist. So if a dog is constantly getting like a Kong bounced or a tennis ball bounced right there, and the dog's like, oh, in heaven right there, getting rewarded, the next dog that comes through knows exactly what happened in that spot. They're like, oh, this is where I want to be. Handler cues, intentional or unintentional. So none of these things are malicious. These are just what we know, that because dogs have co-evolved with humans, they're so in tune to us. This has been part of their survival mechanism. So they are constantly looking for every little thing we do, whether that's reaching for a pocket or shifting our weight or holding our breath. Sometimes we hold our breath. I do the statue. Like when I get really close to the target, I start to sort of stiffen my back. I saw that on video and I was like, oh man, that's freaking obvious. So, the dog's thinking, every time I go near this area, my handler shifts their weight or holds his breath. It's another cue. Dogs pick up on that right away. Blind and double blind assessments. Typically, we're not seeing that done in a lot of these tests. So, again, dogs won't even look at the handler. Sometimes they'll figure out that someone in that area knows the answer because that's the person that's shifting their weight, or that's the person that's sucking their teeth. Dogs also are able to, have other ways of detecting things, right? So it's not just olfactory. They're going to use any and all of their senses to get at the right answer. So there's visual, thermal, vibration. It was, dogs were just, there's a paper out just recently about how dogs can detect fevers. And so they're going to see it like a heat signature coming off of the handler. It's like, well, she might as well just throw the training aid at my face. Because that's, like if it's all hot in this one area, your dog's going to see that. Fresh disturbance. I witnessed this one with my dog a lot because we'll train in some old abandoned building. Everything in the room is stale and smells like old library books, but not this drawer. This drawer has been freshly disturbed, open, closed, what have you. Major cue, the dog's absolutely going to show change of behavior there. Not related at all to target odor recognition. And then anomaly detection. So dogs are wonderful at detecting anomalies. Again, that's a survival thing. So which one of these scent boxes doesn't belong? Oh, I know, it's the one covered in dog slobber. Or if you're in a field and it's, it's a field, and then all of a sudden there's a scent box there. It's like, okay, that doesn't belong here. Let me go check that out. That looks pretty cool. So again, so many reasons that dogs will demonstrate change of behavior. And that's why you need all of these different experimental controls so that you can weed all of those other reasons out and make sure that dogs are not relying on any of those other cues, crutches, whatever you want to call them, to get at anything other than olfaction and target odor. So there, I guess what I want to sort of talk about is that there's a cost-benefit analysis of participating in testing. And there's potential benefits for sure. I mean, you get to be part of the scientific and discovery process. I know as a poor college student, I was always signing up for some sort of test to be in for like $20. So I'd go to like, psych department. I'm like, yeah, I'll take that survey. Or the physical therapy department. I'm like, yeah, I'll put my leg in that MRI, whatever. Paid or unpaid, I was like, this is cool. I'll be part of the scientific process. I don't mind being guinea pig. I thought that was, a good thing to do. Another benefit is being first. So you get to be the first sometimes to evaluate a novel training aid. And then sometimes there's perks. There's free training, there's a free training aid. There could be publicity associated with it. I'm sure there's a bunch of other potential benefits that I don't even know about. So there's certainly benefits. There are also potential costs. And so one of the big ones, and I sort of always want people to think about, what are you training your dog on? And was there an informed consent in that process? Because informed consent would sort of go over the cost benefit analysis. You would know what you're training on, why you're participating, what your participation means, how your information that you're contributing could be used, and if there are any sort of like dangerous aspects to what you're doing, there's a very sort of standard process to informed consent. And it's really, that's part of any sort of real research project involving humans and or dogs. So you do want to know, or just ensure that there's no toxicity involved in your training aid, like an inhalational hazard. You would want potentially a safety data sheet. I think that's, pretty basic. For the most part, I think we want to assume that our training aids are non-hazardous. That's why we're typically creating novel training aids, so that we can get away from some of that true material and create non-hazardous training aids, but it would be nice to have some sort of assurance of that. In terms of potential costs, I also would say that there are potential ramifications in terms of, if you take your operational dog and you start not just in that testing, you don't just have a dog that goes through and change of behavior and there's no reward, there's no learning experience, but you do reward, or you do start to sort of create a learned experience in that testing process. You could create false alerts that could just be a nuisance. So that could require some remedial training, or you could have some false alerts that could be detrimental to the point where you need to wash your dog out. And so the question I ask is that, what is your time worth to you if you need to do remedial training? And what is your fully trained operational dog worth to you if you need to wash that dog out? So, I know in human remains detection, if you had a dog that was, suddenly alerting to all sorts of animal remains, that could be a major issue. that could be a nuisance if you were able to fix that. I feel like that could also be potentially detrimental to the point where you might have to wash that dog out, depending on your search environment. And I think that would be pretty upsetting for a lot of handlers. So these are the type of things you want to sort of think about and have an idea of what you're willing to not risk, but really what what the again cost benefit analysis for you, which would be individual before you go into any of these scenarios. So some of the buzzwords or things that you should be on the lookout when you're participating in like a real canine research and development project would involve an animal use protocol. So we can't do anything without an AUP. And that is it's like any other scientific protocol, but it really outlines everything that we're going to do in the experiment. And that is reviewed by an institutional animal care and use committee, so an IACUC. All of these scientists that are involved in our projects have been trained by the ALAS, the American Association for Laboratory Animal Science, in ethics, procedures, and the 3 R's, which are reduce, refine, and replace. So you always want to reduce the number of animals that you are going to use in an experiment. You want to refine any procedures that could be painful, cause pain or distress in an animal, and then replace higher order mammals with lower vertebrates if possible. Typically, these don't apply to canine training aid evaluations, but still always important to keep in mind. All of our personnel are also trained in occupational health and safety, and we have a process of informed consent and enrolling qualified individuals to participate in that. There's a responsible principal investigator who has their sort of ass on the line for being responsible for all of this. So there is accountability, and we have to do literature's reviews for duplication to ensure that we're not conducting work that's already been done before. So because that would be potentially wasteful of animals. I mean, a lot of these are geared towards toxicology studies, so that or studies that end an animal's life. So we really want to make sure that we don't do that, but that's not the kind of work we're doing. We also have to have a statistically valid design of experiment that is validated and vetted by statisticians that would conduct a power analysis to see how many animals need to be enrolled in the study to ensure that we have a chance of getting any sort of statistically significant results. A data rights and management plan. So that's any data that we get, what are we going to do with it? Who does it belong to? How is it going to be managed? How long is it going to be kept and where? There's a lot to do with that. We have documentation, oversight, peer review, continuing review at various levels. We have to justify any and all procedures. And then on top of that, with our group, we have third-party testing and that IV&V. So if we were to make a training aid, we wouldn't be the ones to test it, because for us, that's a conflict of interest. So we would send that training aid to someone else for testing, and vice versa. If someone else creates a training aid, then we can do the test and evaluation. So those are sort of the things that you would want to look for when participating in canine R&D, and that would give you pretty good assurances that you're going to be taken care of and part of some really cool research. So that is my slide deck. I will hand it over to Robin and the rest of you to go through questions.
Okay, we had a couple. Lucia actually piped in. And
Yay!
so, yes, so that was kind of exciting. Um, so one of the questions was, is there a study going on as we speak about any of the brands that are out there for any of the current novel training aids? Can you discuss any of that?
Damn you, Lucia.
She didn't ask that, somebody else did.
Okay. Yes, there are studies that are currently ongoing. There are studies that are ongoing. The results will be published, and but right now we don't have all of the results, so we don't have anything that we can conclude at this point.
Let me see. Mary had asked if they also include in the controls blank substrates or distractors, and Lucia answered that one, that yes, I believe.
Absolutely.
Yep,
Yeah, so we could get into the nitty gritty of the actual T&E, but yes, blanks, distractors, controls, empties, and then I'm always talking about, like, we wipe down the scent wheels and cans between each dogs. The scent wheels are rotated. People are behind shuts and blinds. There's I don't know, hundreds of steps that we take to ensure that, again, those change of behaviors are not due to anything other than odor detection.
Okay. We've had several people ask for copies of the slides.
Okay.
If those could be shared. So,
yeah, I think so.
Okay, cool. Since it's you just have to get approval from your PR person. Or
I think I'm my PR person because I was representing myself today.
Yeah, exactly. So the conflict of interest is a great point. Asking a vendor for their scientific studies about their product lacks an independent study. While it doesn't mean their study isn't valid or properly done, the conflict of interest aspect should be considered. Yes, Mary, absolutely. In the control studies, do you utilize proofing off of similar chemical signature odors to prevent generalization, or only testing them?
I understand that one. And it might just be because it's late. So
can you pull up your chat, because then you can read it. I think about the whole, in the control studies, I think about, especially for explosives dogs, having my dog alert on command strips, right?
Oh, gotcha. Okay. So that would not be part of a training and validation study. That would be part of the further research, where you want to see if there's, in terms of generalization, if you wanted to see if there were any issues there, so there could be a discrete generalization study. And then also you could potentially put out distractors that you were concerned about with those similar signature or similar odor profiles that would potentially be like cause nuisance alarms or what have you.
So in the cadaver dog world, I think of, okay, will training on this now teach my dog to alert on dead squirrels?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. So that would be a data confounder in a training aid validation study.
Okay. So that would actually happen separately.
Yes.
From the validation of the aid.
Yes, only because if you ask too many scientific questions in one study, you dilute the potential statistical significance of all of it. So you need to ask really like one or two questions to really get at what, like, to get an answer, and then you can do another study to specifically look at that. But I've done studies where, and I've learned the hard way, where I ask too many questions and it always ends up screwing me. So I don't do it anymore.
Excellent. Okay. The more studies are, so in other words, more studies are really needed to fully validate a product for single viable source material for training on.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And you know, there is a little bit of trial by fire, right? Because here, I want to say, you know, it's in the working dog world, there just aren't the finances to do this work in any sort of rigorous way. You know, we barely get enough funding within the DoD to do it for explosives. So, you know, I feel the struggle that you all have, and sorry, HRD. It's just, it's really brutal. So I think there's, you know, something to be said for, you're not going to necessarily know all of those unknowns until there's something in the field and people start reporting back like, hey, you know, here's some of the pros and cons of this training aid. And you see if those are something that you can address via training, and that's sort of best case scenario. And you hope it is.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. So Lucia just told me how to skip the chat. So, okay, do we have any other questions from the audience? Otherwise, I think we have exhausted everything. I don't see anything.
Did this make any sense? It was so, okay. I was like the whole, like the crossing of the things and the true and the controls, and I was like, oh God.
So I have some really some people who want access to studies. Is there any way you can do a literature review or here's some studies that you should go read type of things? You don't have to come up with them right now.
Yeah. We can go through one of those.
But you know, just fine, because even what I can end up doing is making a page on the Canine Census website, and the video will reside there. Maybe we can put the PowerPoint there, and then if there are copies of studies that we can do, I can also put that out there.
Yeah.
And once I get that whole website done, I will send out a link to everybody who registered for the event, and we'll share it across social media.
Yeah,
so
yeah, we can definitely do that. There's very few, so it'll be easy to summarize that, and then we can go over one in depth, and we can talk through how that occurs.
And then we can also put out a link to the study that you cited earlier about the different types of training aids.
Oh, yep, absolutely.
Right. Crystal asked if there are any pseudos with studies that show it's good to use right now.
Not that I know of.
Okay. All right. So excellent. We'll post. Stay tuned. It might be a little while. Like, so be patient. Give us a couple days, like maybe next week, late next week.
I'm expecting this on Thanksgiving evening.
No, so you're gonna all do this instead of go Black Friday shopping.
Right,
no,
right.
So it might be the week after Thanksgiving. So thank you guys all so much, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Robin. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I appreciate it.